Now I call upon Professor Daniel Markovits to continue the case for Proposition.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks to all of you for coming tonight. I know there are hundreds of channels and thousands of websites, so I'm grateful to you for being here. Well, I am standing in a room of uber meritocrats devoted to the project of attacking meritocracy, which means I'll spend a lot of my time attacking all of you. Now, I think it'll be okay for two reasons. The first is that one of my themes is going to be that meritocracy makes the elites gluttons for punishment, so you'll enjoy being attacked. The second is that I'm genuinely interested in what you think, and please, after the debate is over, you have my name. If you have thoughts, send them to me. I want to make 3 points. The first is that meritocracy excludes most of society from meaningful access to advantage, not because we live in an inadequate meritocracy, but because meritocracy is operating as designed. The second is that meritocracy ensnares even those who seem to succeed in a web of effort, manipulation, self-distortion that harms them. And the third is that meritocracy does both of these things by focusing all our energies on things that are shallow and not worthy, instead of on the human excellences that we should in fact individually and collectively aspire to achieve. Let me begin with the first. If I look around this room of Oxford undergraduates, 40% of you were privately educated in a country in which 7% of students have private educations. 80% of you come from meaningful social and economic privilege. As we heard a moment ago, at my university, Yale, there are more students from the top 1% of the income distribution than from the entire bottom half. Now, my university's admissions process is corrupt, and failures of meritocracy might explain it. But Oxford's is not corrupt. You can't buy a place here. There is no meaningful legacy preference. And yet, nevertheless, you're all rich, and you all come from privileged backgrounds, or almost all. Now, why is that? The reason is straightforward. Famous US baseball player once said, "Practice doesn't make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect." Meritocracy, in fact, is not, as we just heard, that advantage turns on effort and talent. It turns on effort and talent, and one more thing, investment. It turns on how much is invested in developing a child's talent using their own efforts. And the investment that different kinds of children get in meritocratic societies is absolutely enormously different. In the United States, the richest private schools spend over $75,000 per pupil per year on educating their children, in a society in which public schools on average spend about $12,000. In this country, the richest private schools spend over £30,000 a year educating their children. These massive investments produce massive differences in childhood achievement, not because of legacy admissions, but because when you get trained, you get good at things. And the result, therefore, is that a meritocracy, when it works as designed, favors those whose parents are in a position best to invest in them, who have the money, who have the skills, and who have the free energy and space to do so. And believe me, meritocrats give rich parents the ability to do so. I'll get it in 1 second. When Michael Young invented the term meritocracy, the richest in England had only half the share of national income that they have today. The richest 10% of earners made twice as much as the poorest 10% of earners. Today, they make 4 times as much. A graduate of this university will make 50% more in her first year out than a graduate of the University of York. So meritocracy creates an inequality in which rich parents have the opportunity to spend all this money on their children, which is why meritocratic children are also rich children. That's the first point. Meritocracy excludes most of society from meaningful advantage. Second point, it's not actually fun to have that much invested in you as a kid. It's not easy. You are poked and prodded and tested and subject to tutors and classes and extra help and schools and exams. And you do this from the earliest age up until adulthood. And then you come here and you work hard, and then you get a job at McKinsey or Goldman Sachs and you work 80 hours a week. And then you become parents, and you live in fear that your children will lose the caste that you have acquired by working so hard. And so as parents, you do two jobs. You squeeze into your children the same thing that was squeezed into you as you're working to try to make the money to enable you to do that. It's not surprising that in England, exam anxiety has now overtaken body image as the largest source of stress in wealthy children. It's not surprising that in a study of a wealthy American private school, 50% of children had moderate to severe clinical symptoms of depression, and 75% had moderate to severe clinical symptoms of anxiety. These are not easy lives to live. You will be extremely wealthy, wealthier than you can imagine, wealthier than prior elites have been, but you will not be well, and your children will not be well. And so even as meritocracy excludes everyone else, it will ensnare those of us in this room who are fortunate, but that doesn't mean that in human terms it serves our interests. That's the second point. Third point, meritocracy distorts what we value and how we value it. To begin with, meritocracy has to decide what merit is. Every meritocracy invents its own way. The Qing dynasty in China had a particular kind of exam-based system based on classical learning and a certain form of erudition. Our meritocracy also has an exam-based system based on the tests you need to take to get into places like this, and then a market-based system based on how much your labor is in demand in a market economy that's largely deregulated under neoliberalism. Now, we all know we're good at exams, but we also know there's all the difference in the world between being able to take a good test and actually understanding something. And there's an even greater difference between test taking and wisdom. An exam-focused education distorts us on trying to learn to the test rather than try to understand the world around us or ourselves. John Dewey said that education is the process of coming to terms with your role in the world. Taking tests to get into university is not that process. Second of all, meritocracy massively distorts how we think of ourselves and how we value ourselves. Meritocracy teaches that the elite deserves its advantages. And the lived experience of the meritocrat, precisely because it's so hard to be one, is one that validates that teaching. This is not a group of wastrels or layabouts. This is a group of extremely earnest, hardworking, serious people who have sacrificed a lot to get here. And they've done it under an ideology that says when you sacrifice in this way, that's the effort, and you do really well at something, that's the talent, then you've earned it and you deserve it. And so meritocracy creates an elite that is indifferent to the common good and that believes in its own entitlements, which is very damaging for society and not so great for the elite either. At the same time, meritocracy tells the rest of society that it's their fault that they aren't in this room. That if they'd been a little more talented, if they'd been a little harder working, if they'd been a little more virtuous, if they'd had a little more merit, then they would have been able to measure up. They would have succeeded. And so they are to blame for what is in fact a form of structural exclusion. And so meritocracy makes the elite smug and leaves everyone else naked in their rejection. And that's an extremely damaging place to be. That explains why in your country and in my country, those who are excluded by meritocracy now have a lower life expectancy than they did 3 years ago. Let me be clear, there has been no other time and place in human history in which absent war or massively fatal plague, and COVID is not that plague, there's been a diminution in life expectancy for a large segment of the population. The source is addiction, the source is alcoholism, The source is obesity. The source is suicide. These are internalized forms of self-hatred produced by what meritocracy says to the people whom it excludes, just as neoliberalism and Davos are internalized forms of conceit produced by what meritocracy says to the elite. So once again, meritocracy excludes most people from advantage. It ensnares the rich in a web of effort and distortion. And it distorts all of us individually and collectively, making us value the wrong things in the wrong ways and for the wrong reasons, which is, as the motion says, why there is no merit in meritocracy, or why, as I would say, merit is a sham.